Hello and welcome back to everyone that's tuned in to the American Ultra Stock channel. Thank you so much for being with us. We've been absent a little bit, but we can't miss this one. The USMNT is going to be playing at the Nations League, a competition that we own, let's be honest. And we're going to be taking on Panama on the 20th of March, hopefully making it to the final on the 23rd. And this is our video predicting the roster selection. So as always, we're going to leave our insight as well and then what we think Poch will do. Braden, ultimately, if you were in charge of it, who would you call out for the goalkeeping position? I think is the one that we're in most dire need of someone to step up.
Yeah, and just before we start, I think it's important to mention that the 60-man preliminary roster came out, I think about a week ago. And so if there's any big names that you don't hear us say that maybe are injured, like Sergiño Dest, Malik Tillman, some people want Richie Ledesma to be called up, Haji Wright's returning from injury, players like that, they were not on the preliminary roster, so they can't even be called up to begin with. Same things with dual nationals like Henry Chase, Nathaniel Brown. Any guys that you think we might leave out, just make sure they're on the preliminary roster first, because we can only pull from that pool of 60 players. Now for the goalkeepers, there's 7 options. None of them are good. I think it's pretty obvious Matt Turner is going to be the starter. He's been the starter for us for so long, especially the entire time under Poch. He's going to be the number 1 for better or for worse. I think Patrick Schulte will also be there. He's traditionally been the number 2 under Poch, and I like that call-up. He's one of the younger guys, not fully young, but he's already developed as a starter for one of the best teams in MLS, and he's still, he was Olympic eligible. He was at the Olympics, so he's still relatively young, especially for a goalkeeper. And for the third option, I think it'll probably be Zach Steffen, unfortunately. I'm going with for my prediction because it's more of what I want to happen with Diego Cochin, because I think it just makes more sense to have him there. I think having him as the third goalkeeper from now on should be the norm, unless he somehow jumps up to number 2 or number 1, which we can't see happening for the foreseeable future. But it's good to have him involved with the group from a young age, because we know he has the potential. He's probably most likely to become our number 1 for the future, for the long term. So having him integrated into the group as soon as possible makes the most sense. So those are the 3 that I picked.
Yeah, I also go with Turner and Schulte right here. I'm agreeing with Poch if those are the 2 ones that he's going to call. And I agree with you. I'm going with Cochin and as the third, the backup of the backup, because I think one thing that we failed to do recently, and it's because, well, to be fair, in the recent history, we haven't had the crazy talented players that are young. But I think we need to start integrating them at an early age, like Cochin. So they get assimilated with the national team. They know what the feeling is like, and eventually he's going to take up the reins as the number 1. That's what we hope for. So why not have him included with the senior players right now, just so he gets acclimated with what the USMNT, the main senior side, looks like. I would call him up because ultimately, if you're the third string goalkeeper, you're not going to play anyway. So it has to be someone that makes sense. I think that makes a lot of sense. Moving on to the fullbacks right here. Typically, we call up 4. Do you think that'll be the case this time around? And who would you pick again? And who do you think Poch will pick?
Yeah, so I actually went with 3. I think it could be anything from 2 to 4, because traditionally, obviously, there's 4, 2 for each side. But Poch, more recently, has been only calling up 2, just Scally and Jedi. Now, I don't know how much different that would be if Dest was healthy, but we don't have to worry about that for March anyway, because he wasn't on the preliminary roster. Even if he is healthy, he should be back for PSV relatively soon. So at least from that aspect, it'll be fun to watch him play the remaining games of the season. But I think it is smart to bring 3, even though we have basically our entire roster has been playing right back at this point for their club teams. It's kind of funny. We have McKennie, we have Musa, we have Weah, all these players that have been filling in at the fullback positions, which is another reason why we don't necessarily need to bring that 4. There's also the fact that, let's face it, our backups really are not that great. I debated bringing John Tolkien here, but I just don't know if he's going to be healthy in time. He's one of the rare cases of injured players who are actually on the preliminary roster. Does Poch know he's injured? I don't know, to be honest. He probably just put him there because he was supposed to be in the Camp Cupcake squad, because all the Camp Cupcake guys are on the preliminary roster. I decided to go with Marlon Fossey as my third fullback, just because I think if there is going to be a player subbed out between Scally or Jedi, it's probably going to be a right back. I think Fosse's been having a decent season in Belgium. I think he would make the most sense. Plus, there's the added bonus that Scally himself can play left back. So if Jedi needs a sub, you can shift Scally over, bring in Marlon Fosse. But honestly, I would not be surprised at all to see Poch only bring Scally and Jedi and then lean on the players like Weah, like McKennie, like Musa, like maybe even Tyler Adams to play in those backup fullback spots if it's required.
Yeah, I think that he enjoyed putting Musa more on the flanks, and I think he'll definitely use that if needed. I think that he would be the go-to guy to be if he had to improvise on a right back. I've picked right here Jedi, Token, and Scally. I think that I still can't see him not bringing a third one. I think it just makes sense. You never know what may happen. It is a relatively shorter squad as opposed to the usual 26 when he's been at the helm before. So I've gone to those three. Token, just to justify it, I think that he's taking a step forward in his career, doing relatively well in the Bundesliga as well. Hopefully he stays at that level, but I think that he's a guy that kind of earned it. I think he is the backup to Jedi, even though anyone that steps up to that point will be a huge drop off from Jedi. And now moving on right here to the center backs. I mentioned the goalkeepers as being the position that we need someone to step up the most. Well, that's up for argument because at center back we're a little bit short in quality there, even though some guys are appearing a little bit more often now in everyone's depth chart in terms of quality. Who do you think will get called up, Braden?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because I think there's like maybe 6 or 7 players fighting for probably 4 spots. Again, we don't know exactly how the roster composition is going to go. Maybe Poch will take a 5th center back because he's only going to take maybe 2 or 3 fullbacks. I ultimately decided to put that extra spot towards the midfield just because I think, like I said, some of the midfielders can play as right backs anyway. So it's kind of the same situation there. For the center backs, I went with the 2 starters locked in my opinion, should be Chris Richards and Mark McKenzie. Is it possible that Tim Ream starts because he's the captain and because that's what it has been under Poch? Unfortunately, yes. Honestly, I didn't even pick Tim Ream to be on my roster because not only is he old, but he's not even playing center back in MLS with Charlotte. He's playing left back, which, I mean, we know from the USMNT from a few years ago before he had his little mini renaissance. He's a horrible left back. Maybe for MLS level, he's doing okay because it's not the highest of levels in terms of leagues, but I don't think we need Tim Ream to be there. If he's on the roster as a 4th center back, I guess that's fine. I mean, he is a good leader. He's one of the only good leaders we have in the pool, so that is valuable to have, but at the end of the day, I think we still need to be looking a little bit more forward instead of backwards in terms of our roster complexion. I didn't include him. I do think it's probably a lock that he's there, but from my point of view, I would rather focus on the future, which is why I decided to have Noah Banks as one of my center backs. Despite the fact that he's kind of fallen out of the rotation for Augsburg, I think he showed in the games that he did get, he was starting a few, that he is a Bundesliga caliber center back, or at least close-ish to that level. And similar thing to Coachin, if he's there as the 4th center back, let's face it, how many times do 4th center backs or even 5th center backs play for the national team? Not at all, especially in a 2-game window. Maybe if it was a tournament that you'd play more often, but it's 2 games. It's a semifinal and a final competing for a trophy. Whoever the 4th center back is probably is not going to see the pitch. I'd rather have Noah Banks integrated with the roster as early as possible because I think it's extremely likely that he's part of the USMNT for the next 10, 15 years, especially for the 2026 World Cup. We need to have him be part of the culture, be part of the locker room. So I would call him up. And then for the other one, I went with Austin Trusty. It is possible he's not back in time because he did get injured somewhat recently. So if he's not there, I guess I'll just switch my pick to Tim Ream as the added veteran in the group. But those would be my 4 center backs. I'm curious to see what you would pick.
I completely agree with you. And I'll make another point for our argument to include Banks there. Let's be honest, the opposition, of course, Panama, they've been tricky to us in the very recent past as well. But it should be enough. We should have enough with McKenzie or Richards to not really struggle and have to put banks of 4 center backs in a game. So I think just by calling out McKenzie and Richards as the main 2 guys, that picks itself really at this point. I think Ream's going to be there. I think he may even start. It wouldn't shock me at all if he starts. And then the next 2 I've picked, it's crazy. It's never going to happen. I picked Zimmerman because similar reason to Ream. If you are going to add an experienced guy, I would pick Zimmerman. I think that Ream is really past it, and I don't think he has a remote chance of even playing next year in the World Cup. I know that technically it's possible. I think it may even happen, but I think levels-wise, he would be farther than what Zimmerman, who isn't even a great center back himself, would be, and he's also a leader. He was in that leadership role in the Olympics. And then Noah Kai Banks, who, similar to Cochin, basically the same argument. You need to start integrating these guys that are really talented and are not even going to cost the team by being included there. So for the opposition that we're facing, I'll be 100% comfortable with these guys being the center backs. Now, moving on to the midfield, that's the area of the pitch that we have the most depth. Curious to see what configuration he's going to go with, how many are going to get called up, but up to you next, Braden. Who would you pick for this one? How many midfielders? How many do you think he'll pick, and who ultimately?
Yeah, I'm going heavy on the midfield, number one, because I took a spot from the fullbacks. I also took a spot from a different roster group that, again, some of the players in the midfield here can play. I think that some of the guys that I'm going to mention might even not play in the midfield for the USMNT under Poch. Number one of those is Yunus Musa. I have him in here as a center mid because I think that's long-term probably his real position. Let's be honest, but under Poch, he has played as a winger. He's played as a winger for Milan at times. He's even played as a fullback. So I have him in the midfield. I think it's very possible that he is a fourth winger. I'll give a little spoiler. I only picked 3 actual wingers, so I think Musa could fill that role as the fourth, but I have him here. The other 8 that I picked was Weston McKennie. I think that obviously is a no-brainer. He picks himself at this point. He's one of the most consistent, one of the best players in the roster. I also went with another 8, Paxton Aronson. I think this is probably more of an outsider's chance of actually happening, but I think he's had an incredible season for Utrecht. He has them in 3rd in the Eredivisie, pushing for Champions League spot despite not even being there on a permanent deal. I think next year is going to be huge for him at Eintracht Frankfurt. If he's playing at that high of a level, he should be in consideration for a World Cup roster spot, and I think it's been long overdue that he deserves a look. He got 1 call-up for the Nations League, actually, when we were there back in November, but he didn't actually get any minutes. That was in 2023 as well. He needs a senior team call-up under Poch. I hope he gets his first one. He's definitely more deserving than some of the other players that are in consideration, like Busio, like Luca De La Torre. We'll see if it actually happens, but I decided to pick him. I went with 3 CDMs as well. Tyler Adams, of course, the no-brainer, one of our captain candidates. He was the captain during the 2022 World Cup. We know how good he is. He's finally hit a form of consistency with Bournemouth, so he's a no-brainer. Johnny Cardoso, another one who basically picks himself, has been in incredible form for Real Betis. That game against Real Madrid in particular was incredible. One of the best games that I've seen a USMNT player play against that level of opposition in a long time. So despite his struggles for the USMNT in the past, I think he's earned another chance to be potentially a starter in this camp, especially since our number 10 options aren't exactly the best. Maybe we shift up McKennie to play the 10 and have a double pivot of Adams and Johnny. I think that's something that's worth considering. And then I also decided to pick Tanner Tessman because he's been a pretty much of a mainstay under Poch, and I think arguably he's more of a safer option than Johnny, at least in terms of the national team performances. I think there's no argument that Johnny's probably a better player than Tanner Tessman, but if you look at what they've done for the USMNT, Tessman's probably a little bit higher in that regard. So I think all 3 of them will be there. And then for the 2 number 10s, Gio Reyna, despite his up and down, mainly down season, he did start 2 games in a row for Dortmund, and they did have good attacking performances, albeit he was not a part of that at all. He actually got praised for his defensive abilities in an interview, which was probably the first time and maybe last time that ever happens in his career, which is interesting, but I think he's a no-brainer as well, at least for the roster when he's healthy, and for once he actually is healthy now, so he should be there. And then Brendan Aronson will be there as well, whether people like it or not. I expect most people don't like it, but he's a mainstay under Poch. Poch loves him. He loves a workhorse. Aronson is a workhorse, so I have both Aronson brothers here. Maybe that's biased, maybe it's not. I'm curious to see what kind of midfield you pick, because I went a little bit heavy.
I've also gone heavy with the midfielders. I'm going to have a take that I know you won't like, but I'm going to have one that you will. Out of the Aronsons, I will pick only Paxton if I was the one calling up. I know Brennan's definitely going to get called up. That's for sure. But if I was to be the guy in charge, I would give Paxton. I think he's one of the most overlooked players in the USMNT poll, even by the fan base. If he was anyone else except Brendan Aronson's brother, I think he would get more credit for whatever reason. They kind of affiliate both of them as if they were the same person, and the frustrations they have with Brendan, they for some reason they shine it on Paxton as well and don't really look into it. He's a very good player. I think for the CDMs, I'll just start with that now in order. Adams and Johnny, I think they are the clear favorites for that position. If we play with only one, I think it's Adams. Johnny has been in great form for club. He still needs to show for the USMNT, but I'm going to give him a vote of confidence. At that point, if you are playing that well for your club, regardless of your past with the USMNT, I think you deserve to get called up. You're in the best moment of your career. So I'll pick them. Because Poch liked Tesman so much and praised him and before, and I think that having a third CDM and a guy that can play the 8 and good in possession, especially bringing some physicality that the other two might not have towards the end of the game, I think that's useful. Hopefully we don't have to, but I have picked Tesman for that as well. And then for the 8 position, that's why I've gone with Paxton and McKennie. McKennie picks himself, and I have Musa as well, but he's, like he said, he's on my wingers depth right here. So that's the midfield that I've gone with. Ultimately, I think we are really good, really chill for the midfield position. We have so much quality there. It would have been great if that was the case in some other ones. But now we move on to the forwards. Do we just group them all as forwards, or do you want to go with wingers, group them all together? I think it's simpler because they may play a variety of roles. But ultimately, the guys up front, the guys in charge of scoring goals, hopefully, who will you be tasking to be doing that?
Yeah, I think we can just group them all together. For the wingers, I already mentioned Musa in the midfield, that's, I guess, one of them. You can argue under Poch. I have 3 other ones. Two of them are no-brainers. Christian Pulisic, of course, speaks for himself. Captain America, our best player. Despite Milan's struggles, he still had a pretty good season. Tim Weah, another one. He's had a pretty good season with Juventus, albeit not necessarily at the winger position as of late. He's become their starting right back now. I mean, McKennie had that spot for a little while. He was kind of flipping between right back and left back. Weah was getting some minutes at the wing, and then they had some reinforcements come back from injury. McKennie moved into the number 10 role, and Weah filled in at right back, and he's been doing that for the last several games. He's been doing a pretty good job as well in the defense, in the attack, all aspects of the game. He's been doing well. He should be one of our starting wingers for this camp. I don't think he's actually played a game under Poch yet. I could be wrong about that, but I mean, our last camp was November, and I don't know if he was healthy for that. So I know he was, but I think regardless, it's good to get another look, especially when it means more in a semifinal and a final. I think he's a no-brainer to start alongside Pulisic. And then the other one that I put was Alejandro Zendejas. He's in the form of his career with Club America. It seems like every single game he gets a goal or an assist or even both. It's honestly incredible what he's been doing there. Yes, it's not the highest of levels in Liga MX, but it's still better than, let's say, some of the MLS options that are there. And he's been playing like one of the best players in the league. So I think he's done everything to justify a call-up. Will he be good enough for the USMNT? Probably not, but our options are a little bit thin. So I think he's better than the Camp Cupcake guys, who are basically the only other options there. So those are my wingers. I anticipate you'd have the same. And then if we're going to group them up, I'll just say my 2 strikers. I only have 2 here. Josh Sargent is one. I think, again, it's a no-brainer since Pepe's out injured, Balogun's out injured. Haji Wright might be back in time, but he's not on the preliminary roster, so he can't get called up anyway. It's Sargent's spot, realistically. For the other one, it's a very curious one because I think he might call up Brendan Vasquez, who's been in A-team camps under Poch. For some reason, he might call up Patrick Adjemong, who had a pretty good showing in Camp Cupcake, and I think you could definitely make a solid argument for him. But the one that I ultimately went with was Damian Downs, which is maybe a bold call. Probably won't happen, but he was on the preliminary roster, which I think is notable. And despite him being with Germany's U20s the last few months, I think it's definitely a safe bet to say that he would commit to the USMNT, especially since recently he did actually delete his Instagram posts that were related to Germany's youth national team. So I think I'm just going to choose to be optimistic in that regard and say that maybe that means he's preparing for a USMNT call-up in March. And that would be incredible because especially with Balogun and Pepe out, this would be the perfect time for him to come in and prove that he deserves a spot, not just now, but for the future, because he's an incredible talent, doing so well in the 2nd division of Germany with Cologne. Still such a young player, born in 2004, and he could be a huge part of our program in the future. And of course, we don't want to lose him to Germany. So I hope he's there. Those are my forwards. I'm interested to see if you picked other players. I think there's definitely other directions you could go with this.
Yeah, just to correct myself, I forgot to include the guy that is the most forgotten these days, Gio Reyna. I've picked him for my roster. I just forgot to say it. It was funny how he said it was mostly downs instead of ups in his season, but I've picked him nonetheless. He's very talented, and I think he brings something a little bit different. So just a correction there. Now for my forwards, first one, Captain America. I'm not gonna expand too much on that. He picks himself. He's the best player of the team. I've gone with Weah and Musa. I think both of them will likely play as wingers. I can see maybe Musa being shifted to right back depending in transition, but I think they'll definitely be there, and I would pick them anyways. Now, here's where it gets a little bit, maybe this is a hot take, but following the Cochin and the Nokai Banks one, I've gone with Cole Campbell. I would honestly pick a guy that's that talented and just to be there, be part of the training squad, see what they're doing, be included, maybe get a cameo in the last 3 minutes just to say that you played, see what the feel is like. I think this is probably one of the most important players we're going to have going forward. I don't know if for 26, maybe that's too soon, but for the 2030 World Cup, definitely. He's a huge talented player. So I think that including him here wouldn't hurt. But then again, it is a competitive match, so maybe that would get me fired if it doesn't work, because how much he can contribute if the match is tough. And then for the two striking positions, I've gone with the exact same as you, Damian Downs, and for the same reasons as well, and Josh Sargent. But I will say Sargent needs to deliver. I'm a little bit iffy about this camp because we are short on the striker position. Sargent is worse than Jesus Ferreira for the USMNT. Hot take there, but it's true. It's objectively true. And he needs to deliver as soon as possible. He has had a lot of chances for the USMNT, a lot of matches that he was supposed to step up and he didn't. So I'm a little bit, that's the only part of the camp that I'm a little bit iffy about. So let us know in the comments below what you think about our roster picks. Any hot takes right here? Do you agree with this shift towards the younger guys or not? Who would you call up? Any names that you think we're missing, even in the preliminary list, that you think maybe we're treated unfairly? Let us know in the comments below. We'll make sure to be uploading a lot more frequently now. My apologies, it's entirely on me, but thank you for sticking around and watching us. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends, and we'll see you next time.